Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, today we're back on the Turbo Beetle, and today I think we're going to have a short video because we only have a couple items left on the mock-up stage here that I want to get finished up before we can finally get started on the engine build. So what do we have to work on today? Well, I need to work on cutting the rear 10, which I've got my template made up. I'll show you a few adjustments that I made on that. And I think I want to actually throw everything back on again, lay the harness back in here, and get one more rib nut installed for the harness support. I think after that we're finally done. We're finally ready to get this engine build going. I know you've been waiting for it, I've been waiting for it, and I can't wait to finally get this thing running again. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So before we get to cutting here, let me show you where we sit with the template so far. So essentially this is a template that I started making with manila folders and then transferred over to 1/8 inch thick ABS plastic sheet that I had. This really kind of gave me a nice rigid structure to work with throughout the process. You see I've got some tape and some other marks on here. Just wanted to get some final fit up and final adjustments made. So essentially for my template here, I put this piece of tape in to close up this gap. And then I put tape in up around the cylinder tins themselves, just so I can get a nice snug fit here so that when I lay this thing and trace it out on the material that we're gonna cut it from, I get a nice close fit to these cylinder head tins. So I think at this point, we're ready to go ahead and pull this template out. We'll go ahead and start laying it out on the material, and we can get to cutting. So as always, we'll start by taking the apron off, getting it fully out of the way, and then from there we'll have full access to the rear tin. To get that out, it's fairly easy. Knock the oil feed line off the turbo, 2 bolts here at the corners of the tin, and then it just lifts right out. So now we can lay this template down on the bench. From there we'll go ahead and grab the material that we're going to cut this out from. So this is some 1/8 inch thick aluminum. I picked this up, I believe, on Amazon or somewhere. And should be able to just lay this template down, trace it out, make a real easy pattern. So I like to use real fine tip Sharpies. It gives a nice crisp line to follow. So be real careful about how you place this on the piece of aluminum. And then simply trace it out, making sure to mark all the holes, going ahead and making nice lines against all the edges. With everything traced out, we can go ahead and start preparing to cut. So I'll go ahead and get my extension cord out. To cut this, we're going to use just your basic handheld jigsaw. So we'll get this thing plugged in, make sure I got a nice blade in it, everything's ready to go. And then from there we can kind of start basically clamping this to the table. This fixture table not only is good for welding, but also anything else where you kind of need an extra hand to hold stuff. So here I'm just sort of overhanging the edge of the plate so I can use the jigsaw and start cutting. Cutting this is relatively straightforward. Obviously you're just following the lines of your template. You'll find that you'll have to kind of cut little pieces out as you go along the way. There's sort of a limited swing on how quickly you can turn the jigsaw as you're cutting something thick like this. But relatively straightforward process. What I did notice is that basically the base of the jigsaw tended to sort of scratch at the surface and sort of knock some of my lines back off. So here in a few times, you'll see me kind of go back over and retrace over some lines just so I've got something real nice and sharp to follow. It's about this time that I thought I had everything well in hand. Basically was hitting the easy button, getting this knocked out when I made a mistake.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
So basically what happened is as I was cutting this thing, sort of cutting out a piece to give myself clearance, I sort of got distracted and went in for the next cut and cut right through something that I was supposed to save. So I caught it relatively quick, so not too much of an issue other than the fact that Going to waste a little bit of extra material here, but I was able to basically stop, retrace my template again, sort of moving up on the material, and just sort of start over. So at this point, the pressure's on. I wanted to make sure that I didn't goof this up again, but essentially the same thing. Trace it out, go ahead and make some cuts, and get this thing knocked out. So I restarted this process by cutting off this nice clean end of material here. So I basically had this nice square piece as a drop to save to use for other stuff. And then went back to town, sort of clamping and cutting out my traced out pattern again. So relatively straightforward, just follow the lines, taking my time this time, making for sure that I don't accidentally make a mistake. And we'll go ahead and get this knocked back out and ready to sort of test fit back on the car. So with the rough shape of the tin done, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the notch and the leading edge for the outlet of the compressor housing. And so basically I start with a hole saw to kind of get a nice clean cut in the material there and just kind of take the bulk of that material out. Got to be real careful to make sure this is clamped down pretty tight because the hole saw tends to bite pretty hard in this material. And then I follow that up with a jigsaw basically just to connect the hole and sort of make the notch in the edge of the tin. Now we'll do a quick test fit on the tin just to see how it fits around the outlet of the compressor housing. Again, this is like my previous video where we work on the shroud, where you kind of want to cut a little bit at a time just to make sure you get a real nice fit and that you don't go overboard and cut too much. What I managed not to record here is the same sort of process that I did for the hole for the air cleaner piping that runs down pre-turbo. Same sort of process, started with a hole saw and then just used the die grinder and sander and jigsaw basically to make the sort of oblong oval shaped hole for that to go through. Again, iterative process, cut a little bit, try to see how it fits, go back and forth and basically kind of sneak up on what you're looking for here. So as a final step here, just taking my Scotch-Brite, sort of getting in the bottom of the plate, kind of a nice scuff to get a nice even finish. And then we can pull off the top of the protective layer, sort of the top side of the piece of tin, and then we can go ahead and get it back in the engine bay and kind of see how it fits up. Of course, I'll be painting this before it's all said and done, so I'm not too worried about scratches, but you know, I like to try to keep things clean while I'm working on it in the shop. But from here, we'll go ahead and give it a wipe down, and then we'll throw it back in the engine bay and we'll see how it fits. So overall, a pretty quick piece to drop in. You know, looking at this and thinking ahead, I'm not sure how easy this may be once the crank pulley is in place and I have a fan belt in the way. But that's something that we'll have to look at as we get a little bit closer to mocking things up. But right now, really happy with the gaps and how nice and tight everything fits. So we'll go ahead and hook up the feed line back to the turbo. We'll throw the bolts back in the corner of the tin, and we can basically throw everything back in the engine bay as far as mock-up on the intake, and we can kind of get a good look on how everything's going to work together. Alright, a little jump forward in time here. Went ahead and got the tin fitted, and I went ahead and put the full intake system back on. Kind of skipped over recording that because I think you guys have seen that a couple times in the last few videos. But anyway, very happy with the fit up of the rear tin that I cut out. I've got nice and consistent gaps around the cylinder head tins. I think more than likely I will have some rubber edging that will go between the rear tin and the cylinder head tins to help seal everything up. Nice and consistent fit around the tube for the air cleaner, around the turbo outlet and turbo feed. All in all, real happy with how that came out. Alright, so last thing to do is to go ahead and get the harness, drop it back in here. We'll figure out where that last rib nut needs to be installed in the shroud. And I think that's going to get us finished up. So let's go ahead and knock it out. You know, I always like the way these engine bays look without wires in there, nice and clean. But when you get this much electronics in the engine bay and then you have to get a harness back in, sort of control everything, it gets kind of messy, a little bit more busy looking than I like. I know there's a lot of people that do a lot of sort of quote-unquote tucked harnesses, and although that's cool, that's not something I've ever gotten into because it really makes it terribly difficult to work on in the future if you ever have to. So I'm more of a functional person over form, I guess, when it comes to the wiring harness. And so I try to make it clean, use braided wrapping, heat shrink, really try to lay things out as nice as I can. But I don't worry too much about the fact that, hey, there's wires in the engine bay. It's a fuel-injected engine. It's just part of the process. So going ahead and laying everything out here, putting the branches on for the injectors on both banks, running the harness down for the crank sensor as well as the cam sensor, and then feeding down through for the oil temp sensor down below the tins. And then from there, that's going to allow me to go ahead and figure out basically how this main piece of harness comes over and where I need to drill a hole for the P-clamp, sort of support that on the fan shroud. So just like I did before for the air cleaner mount, we'll start by marking a hole using the center punch, taking 2 bites at it with a drill to drill a pilot hole and then a bigger hole for the rib nut itself. And then from there we can go ahead and set a rib nut in and then use a nice threaded bolt to hold that P-clamp in place. It's much better than like a self-tapper screw because it allows you to be able to basically remove that thing and reinstall it several times without sort of that hole sort of stripping out. So if you don't use rib nuts in your build, I highly suggest it's something you consider. It's a relatively inexpensive tool. It's something that once you have, you'll find lots of opportunities to use it. I got rib nuts all over this setup to hold fuel lines and the harness and fuel pressure regulator and anything you can think of into the sheet metal on the car, and real happy with the way that works out long term. So now that we've got that in place, we'll go ahead and screw the bolt in to secure the harness, and we're going to call this done and dusted. And just like that, we're finally done with the engine mock-up. Really happy with how everything came out. It's been a lot of work to get to this point, a lot of back and forth from my own doing, but really happy with where we've landed. If you liked today's video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, follow along for more updates. I think at this point, the only thing that's left is get the engine pulled out, and we'll start doing the engine build. Anyway, we'll see you next time.